there, I'm Sam, and well, I'm not an indie game developer. I've dabbled in Unity and done my fair share of C# scripting, but overall my main role in this community is to play indie games, talk about, critique, and promote them. In my opinion, this gives me a unique opportunity to talk to game developers and give them my opinion on how to make an awesome itch.io game. So if you're looking for a Unity tutorial or words from a game developer on how to make the perfect indie game, this isn't the place for you. I'd recommend checking out a channel like Jonas. But if you're looking for a gamer's perspective on how to make a truly successful, cohesive indie game, you're in the correct place. This is actually the second video in my How to Make an Awesome Indie Game series, so if you haven't seen the first one, I'd highly recommend you go watch it and come back to this one. Over the course of this video, I'm going to be assuming that you've already determined the reason for making your indie game, and that is going to be absolutely crucial. So if you've not yet determined your reason, that's what my last video was about, so definitely go watch that and come back. But today, our topic of discussion is game feel, and more specifically, how to plan out a cohesive indie game so that the whole thing feels like one experience and every single section of the game works together. This is one of the most difficult and elusive parts of making a great indie game, but I'm going to do my best to cover it clearly today. And hey, if you're not yet subscribed to this channel, make sure to hit that big red subscribe button down below. If you're watching, I assume you're a game developer or an aspiring game developer, and I make indie game content 6 out of 7 days of the week, so if you don't want to miss that, don't forget to subscribe, and chuck me a like and comment on the video. Every single one really helps out the channel, and I do appreciate it. Now let's jump into how to plan a cohesive indie game. Roll the intro. Alright, so by now I assume that you've checked out my first video on how to determine a reason for your game. If you haven't, shame on you. But if you have worked your way through that video, then you have already determined what you want your players to get out of the game. Now, an extremely related question to that one is, how do you want players to feel while playing your game? And this is the first step to planning an overall cohesive game experience. There's a lot of right answers to this question. One, you could want players to feel lighthearted and just have some fun with the gameplay. You could want players to be touched by the story. You could want players to feel oppressed or scared while playing the game. All of these are valid answers, but it is incredibly crucial to determine the answer to this question before you step into the following steps. Now, in my opinion, there are 4 main aspects that you have to take into consideration when planning out a cohesive indie game, and I'm going to lay them out in the order that I've determined will be best for you to maximize your planning efficiency. Now, the first set of decisions that you're going to have to make when planning out your game revolve around the story. Now, not every single game has a story, so the first thing you're going to need to decide is whether to even include one. If you're making an Angry Birds type game where all you have to do is try to get into your enemy's fortress, or any other lighthearted, only gameplay focused game, adding too much of a story is merely going to be distracting and boring for players who just came there to have a fun gameplay experience. Likewise, if you're trying to create a sweeping, dramatic game and you don't include any cutscenes or story, the game's gonna feel really off and disappointing for players who came there based on that. Determining whether to have a story is a really important step, and I think it's something that indie game developers overlook and leave till the end of their project, and it just feels disconnected from the rest of the game. If you are interested in checking out an indie game that really knows its purpose and works story into it perfectly, make sure to go check out Millions of Minions on Steam. This game is only in its development stages, but it really impressed me from a story perspective. Now, the majority of this game is very gameplay focused while moving from dungeon to dungeon and fighting waves of enemies, but by including a short 1 or 2 minute cutscene in the beginning of the game, it really gives you a feeling of purpose as the main character, and adding that little bit of story in adds to the excitement and knowledge surrounding the game. Likewise, I've played a lot of games that really fail in this aspect. I don't want to name any names, but recently I was playing an itch.io game, which was a physics-based 2D platformer, and it was split into very small individual levels, so much so that it almost felt like a mobile app. Now, I was really enjoying the gameplay aspect of this indie game, but it started with a nearly 10-minute cutscene that didn't play into the gameplay at all. It was a very frustrating and boring experience to me, and although the cutscene was great and the story was well developed, it just did not fit my experience. Okay, I've said enough words about the story of games. Now, moving on to the second aspect that you need to figure out, and this is art design. In my opinion, the first thing that you need to do when sorting out your art design for a game is choose a color palette. Choosing a color palette that works with itself really well and gives you the right feeling can be really hard, and if you need to, you can go to a free website and browse through their color websites? And browse through their color palettes. I know if I was doing it, that's exactly the course I would take because I would never be able to come up with one on my own. In my opinion, choosing a color palette for your game is sort of a know it when you see it experience. If you know what your story is going to be and you have an overall idea of what you want the feeling to be, when you see a color palette that matches that, it is going to pop out at you and you're gonna know. Wow, I feel like I'm talking about falling in love here. I don't want to keep bringing up the exact same game, but Millions of Minions is absolutely fantastic at this as well. Now, one aspect of the story from Millions of Minions is that you as the main character are fighting these enemies and you're all derived from the exact same race, but these enemies have drank a potion and have since turned to the dark side. And one choice that they made when choosing the color palette for that game is to have the enemies be the exact same color palette as the character, but more muted. It's almost imperceptible, but it plays into this perception that you've all come from the exact same origins very well. Now, this is not absolutely necessary, and I think it depends on each game developer's specific personality, but sometimes choosing behind-the-scenes reasons for colors like this can be extremely helpful when determining your color palette. There's many other aspects to art design, and I don't feel like I'm necessarily the most qualified person to talk about them. There's a lot of helpful videos out there on the internet on this subject, but you do need to have your art design be intentionally designed to fit with the theme of your game. Alright, the third aspect to creating a cohesive indie game is the sound design, and this one is so hard. Now, when I say sound design, I'm referring specifically to music and gameplay sound effects. And it is so important to make sure that both of these things fit the theme of your game, and if you get this wrong, it can work against you so hard. Now, I understand that this is really difficult for a lot of indie game developers. Many people work completely solo on their indie game project, and if you have no sound effect or musical experience, it can be really hard to get this right. Let me just say that even if you have to go online and find a copyright-free song that fits your game pretty well, that is so much better than having complete silence in your game, and goodness knows it's better than writing a song yourself that does not fit. If all you know how to create is an 8-bit chiptune and you're going for a sweeping dramatic game, just don't write the music yourself. It is always better to have custom music written, but if you have to, going with copyright-free music for the time being, and maybe hiring a Fiverr music creator in the future to write your music can be a good way to go. Alright guys, let me just interrupt the video really quick to give you a public service announcement. If you're watching this video, you are most likely an indie game developer, and I just want to let you know that I, along with Dindy, Mattabulous, The Programming Juvenile, Doorbell Prod, Yannick, and J-Code are hosting the first ever content creator community game jam on itch.io. It starts in 4 days, so there's still plenty of time to sign up. It's gonna be so much fun. We have 60 people on board already, and I can't wait to see you guys there. Now let's move on with the video. Alright guys, moving on to the fourth aspect of creating a cohesive indie game. You guys probably saw this one coming, but it is, of course, the gameplay. Now this is potentially the most hard and abstract concept of all, but your gameplay needs I mean really needs to agree with the overall theme and feeling of your game. Now there's so many different types of gameplay and so many different aspects to gameplay, I can make 10 videos just on that subject, so I guess I can't go too into detail on how to do this. But one very important aspect that applies across all types of gameplay is pacing. Now, if you don't know what pacing is, there's two main aspects to pacing. One is the actual right here and now gameplay of your game. For instance, if you're playing a 2D top-down shooter, a slow-paced game might be a game where you have to wait for a long time, gather materials, and hide in corners. A fast-paced game might be you need to zip around the map at top speed, constantly avoiding enemies and traps. The other aspect to pacing is how quickly you introduce every single ability in your game and progress the story onward. In my opinion, if you're completely in doubt about pacing, speeding up the game is always the safer choice. Having a fast-paced game will be probably more engaging for your players, and if your pacing is too slow, it definitely can cause players to lose interest quickly, but there are very specific examples where having a slow-paced game can actually work in your favor. If you're looking for a good example of this, check out Journey. This is a fully fledged indie game by That Game Company, and it is perhaps my #1 favorite indie game I've ever played. Now, I'm not gonna get too in-depth on this game, but basically, due to the story of this game, having it be too fast-paced just would not make sense. The whole point is that you're having a slow, methodical journey through the desert lands, and yet this game is not so slow that you get bored and lose interest. It strikes a really delicate balance, and honestly, if I made a game, I don't think I would be able to strike that balance. Pacing is incredibly hard to get right, but if you want to create a great, cohesive indie game, you're just going to have to try and learn how to do it correctly. Alright guys, I hope that I have convinced you that creating a cohesive indie game experience is a key factor into creating an awesome indie game. I will be creating more videos like this in the future, so make sure to hit that subscribe button if you want to see that. Leave a like and a comment on this video if you liked it, and if you want to keep up with me or my community, the places to follow are my Discord and my Twitter, and I will see all of you guys in my video tomorrow. Bye.